Meher Abdullahi coming to you live from LSATMax headquarters in Venice Beach, California. And in this video, I wanted to take a moment to introduce the logic games section of the LSAT. So of the 4 scored sections that will comprise your LSAT score, one of these sections is the logic games. And the logic games section includes 4 games, each of which is going to have 5 to 8 questions that correspond with it. The total section is going to be between 22 and 24 questions, with the more recent LSATs tending to be 23, with some of the older LSATs being 24. Now again, it can fluctuate, so it's not really about the number of questions, it's about how to proceed through this section generally. So let's talk about the things that tend to give students trouble with logic games. But if logic games is your problem area, I have some tremendous news for you. It is by far the easiest section of the LSAT to fix, so you should feel actually quite good about the fact that logic games is your problem area. So in terms of what gives students issues with logic games, it's a couple of things. First is the setup. Obviously, if you're able to set the game up, make the deductions, going through the questions afterwards is not difficult. The key again comes down to making the setup and doing the setup properly. So what you want to do as you go through the games and you do these games is when you review them, you want to check your setup with our setup. You want to ask yourself, what deductions did you miss? And if you miss a deduction, you really want to pay attention to what rule or what combination of rules allowed me to make the deduction that you missed. So for example, on a straight linear game that's 1-to-1, if I'm told A comes before B, well, that tells me automatically B can't be first, A can't be last. Obviously, they can get more complicated. For example, on an in-out group game, if I encounter either A or B, I know at least one of A or B is present. If I encounter not both A and B on the same in-out group game, I know at least one of A or B is not present. And that's what I'm talking about with what you can and can't do with the rules. So when reviewing, again, check your setup, check your deductions. If you miss a deduction, ask yourself what rule or what combination of rules allowed me to make the deduction that you missed. The hope being that if you encounter that rule or combination of rules again, this time you'll make the deduction. Another issue that students have is knowing when to stop. How do I know when to move on from my setup and jump into the questions? Because I feel one of the issues that gives students pause here is this idea of the guru game that exists, where you can actually draw out every single possibility of the game before proceeding. And with those games, if it is possible to draw out every possibility, you want to do it because while it does take longer than just setting up the game generally would, going through the questions once you have every single possibility drawn out is very, very straightforward, and it's actually not going to take any time at all. So if it is a guru game, you do want to take the time to master all the possibilities, draw them out, and then breeze through the questions. So the question now arises is, okay, how do I know when to stop? How do I know if it's a guru game? How do I know if it's not? What if there aren't any deductions for me to make? How can I be comfortable moving on from my setup to the questions? Well, obviously getting comfortable with the games will allow you to get comfortable with when you should stop your setup and when you should move on to the questions. But certain games don't really have a lot of deductions, and you see that a lot with in-out group games, which tend to be accompanied by conditions that are all sufficient and necessary principles. Again, general principles that need to be invoked in order for them to apply. So for these type of in-out group games, and one that comes to the top of my head right off the bat here is the fruit stand game about kiwis and watermelons and oranges, and about a fruit stand having some of these fruits and not having others. So for that type of game, the key is going to be draw the rules, diagram them, write the contrapositive, move on to the questions. There's no reason for you to sit there making transitive deductions, because when these general principles are invoked by the question, you're going to make the transitive deductions anyway. So don't do redundant work by doing it before moving on. Another thing to keep in mind is in terms of guru games, how do I even know that a game is a guru game? Well, the key is that the game is extremely restrictive. A certain variable can only appear in a number of places. And then when you start to place that extremely restrictive variable, other variables start falling into place rather nicely. And again, the only way to get comfortable with this idea of when to stop your setup, when to continue if there's a possibility of mastering all the possibilities, you want to do as many games as possible, because the more games you see, the more your comfort with them will increase and the easier they will be for you. So how do we improve logic games? Very simple. Get every single logic game that has ever been printed and create a stack and start going through them. Give yourself 8 minutes and 45 seconds per logic game. Again, that's what you get on average. Obviously, some games take longer, some games take less time, but on average, it ends up being 8 minutes and 45 seconds. And any game that you can't finish in 8 minutes and 45 seconds or get perfect, you want to put in one pot. On the other hand, games that you do finish in 8 minutes and 45 seconds and get perfect, put in a separate pot. Obviously, we're reviewing all of these games to make sure that even if you got it perfect and finished it on time, we didn't miss any of the key deductions, because we want to make sure that if we did, we're paying attention to the rule or combination of rules that allowed that deduction to be made, so we can make that deduction in the future. But the idea is, for the stack that you weren't able to finish on time or get perfect, you want to go back and do those logic games again. There's nothing wrong with doing the same logic game. The hope on the real LSAT is that the logic game you encounter is going to remind you of a logic game you've already done in your practice, because then you'll know exactly how to approach it. What's the best way to set it up? What should be my base? And in terms of the base, if that's something that you struggle with as well, remember you want to keep in mind the variable that has the inherent order. For example, days of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. That has an inherent order. I'm placing people in days of the week. The people don't have an inherent order. Days of the week have an inherent order. Obviously, in a linear game, 1 through whatever number, the numbers have a numerical order. So that would be my base. Obviously, certain games don't have variables that have inherent orders. And when that's the case, you really want to turn your attention to the conditions and ask yourself, which set of variables do we know more about? And which are the set of variables that we're trying to place? Because the ones you're trying to place, the ones you know less about, that is not going to be your setup. Whereas the other that you do know more about and you're not really trying to place, rather you're trying to place the other variables in, would be your base. So that is the key to the logic games section. Again, get through as many games as possible. Make sure you understand the strategies. And if you haven't been exposed to logic games and you're just getting started, I would highly recommend watching our videos. Our linear game lesson is free in LSATMax Unlocked. The other video lessons are just as helpful. Group games, multilinear games, hybrid games, guru games, and the Lost Boys, because you obviously want to have a foundation of the skills that are going to be tested on this logic games section. But after you get through that, turn your attention to doing as many logic games as possible. And obviously you want to do them under time pressure, because the time pressure is something that's actually going to matter. And speaking of time pressure, our friends at LSAT are aware that certain students tend to be more organized than others. And when I mean more organized, I mean as they're setting up the game and progressing through the question. For that reason, they reward students who are making use of previous hypotheticals. Don't be surprised to encounter a must-be-true question where the correct answer is E. LSAT is doing that on purpose. They know the time that it takes you to get through A, B, C, and D to arrive at E is going to be prohibitive. It's going to be almost impossible for you to do that and finish the game on time. What LSAT is actually hoping that you're doing is relying on previous hypotheticals. Because a must-be-true question, if something must be true, it must be the case in every single scenario. Therefore, if I can find one counterexample, I can eliminate that as a possible answer choice. On the flip side of that coin, when I encounter could-be-true questions, obviously, if I haven't in a previous hypothetical, it could be true, and therefore, it would be the correct answer. So please make sure you take advantage of your previous work, use your hypotheticals to eliminate incorrect answer choices, and hopefully find correct answer choices in an effort to save time and be as efficient as possible. And that is really all you need to know about the logic games section. Please, if you have any questions while doing logic games, do not hesitate to contact us. We're here to help. We can really help you improve your score on the logic games section, because it is the easiest to improve on. All you need to do is continue to practice, continue to expose yourself to the logic games, and you will naturally improve your score. Maran Abdullahi signing off from TestMax.